Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 11:12 a.m. We just missed the angel synchronicity, but don't worry, Mama T already made her wish. Oh, cute. I'm so cute. Oh, I could just always hug myself. But anyway, you just got to have a little bit of nonsense on your day. Fill up your day with sweet, heartfelt things as well, amidst all the dross and the horror. And, just on that note, the sun's come out to shine. I just ran out and brought my washing in because I knew it was going to shower again. Just knew it. Just right in that vibe, baby boys and baby girls. So I brought my washing in. Now the sun's out, but it's still going to be showery for the rest of the day. So I think it was a good decision to bring the washing in. Already been out for a day. Yeah, about a day. So, my dahlias in bloom looks absolutely exquisite. So, life is pretty bloody beautiful at Sacred Space, Titania's Realm. Can't complain. And I thought I would continue on with reading from Great Mysteries of the Modern World. So today's story is titled Mystery of the Missionary and the Men from Nowhere, Alien Intrusions. Something to think about. In June 1959, an Australian priest, Reverend William Gill. Are they usually called reverends, priests? Well, anyway, stood on a tropical beach with 38 other witnesses and gazed up at an extraordinary spectacle. Hovering over the sea was a cluster of glowing circular craft. Atop the closest, which stood stationary above the shallows, was a railed observation deck. Standing on it were 4 men, or what appeared to be men, performing a task of some kind. The next evening the craft astonishingly appeared again. On this occasion Reverend Gill waved, and one of the visitors reciprocated. Oh, that's cute, isn't it? Oh, how sweet. Setting off a prolonged period of waving between the sky ship and the people below. Harmonic resonance comes to mind, people of Earth. This close encounter of the third kind would soon be internationally celebrated. Investigators described it as the first time credible observers had reported the presence of humanoid beings aboard an apparently alien vessel. It would not be the last. I think there was a photo. Oh no, this is of one in New Zealand, but it's also glowing lights in the sky, which is quite astonishing. Right. Just excuse me a little bit. I've got pain in my lungs and sort of all under my chest, and it's from the pressure on my CPAP machine, which I don't know why I've suddenly started getting pain. Don't know whether it means I'm getting better or worse. So I'm just soldiering through that. But it's kind of a dull ache and it can be a bit unpleasant. It's why I gave up CPAP back in 2003 after trialling it for 10 months, because I woke up in chronic pain and the pain endured throughout the day, and then I'd go to sleep at night, still in pain from the night before, and on it went, and screw that, Mama T's going home. So I'm a little bit worried that I'm now manifesting pain, but I'm sure it's just some temporary kind of from the pressure, some muscular thing anyway. So if I go ouch and ook and eek, it's because it's all around my rib cage and radiating to my back. And not all that pleasant actually. Anyway, Let me continue with reading. Nobody at the remote Anglican mission, oh, that's why he was a reverend. Oh no, that's somewhere else. Oh, dear goddess. Where are we? We're all over the shit show today. On a tropical beach, but they don't actually say where that Reverend Gill was. Anyway, let's just rewind a little bit. I'm running ahead of myself. Nobody at the remote Anglican mission in Boianai, Papua New Guinea, had the faintest notion of what was going on. There seemed to be no logical explanation for the brilliantly lit objects, some called them lanterns, which for weeks now had been appearing by night in the tropical sky. Right. Just notice they've got the same name, but they're different first names. I know. Here he's referred to as a father. Well, it's all very confusing, people, there. That's all I have to say about that. Mama T doesn't do confusion. If people try to confuse me, bing, bam, boom, baby, gone. So, it's a psychopathic playbook of sadism. People that sow, confusion, distress. They're not your friends. Just saying. Anyway, I'm starting to wonder if this book's not my friend, because this chapter's about jumpity bumpity. Well, we'll soldier on. I allow 3 strikes before they're out. Bing, bam, boom. Right, who was that? Somebody walking past with their little dog. Right, just caught my eye, corner of my eye. I had to see what was going on. Right, here we go. Inexplicable too were the noises that rolled across the normally quiet sea, explosions so loud that they woke people from their sleep. And who could even begin to explain the large sparkling light that Father Gill in early April had twice watched hovering above Mount Pudi? Eventually, the teachers, medical staff and students living at the mission would receive an answer to their questions, an answer of sorts. Pardon me. All of these, burping, aching, griping, sniping. It could be worse, people. All of these uncanny phenomena had been no more than an overture, a preparation for a series of events that would electrify the world. The performance, so described because it was a seemingly deliberate display, began at 6:45 p.m. on 6th of June 1959. Father William Booth Gill finished dinner and stepped out of the front door of the mission house. He immediately noticed a dazzling light in the western sky. It was at a higher elevation than Venus, which also was visible, and resembled the light he had seen over Mount Pudi 2 months before. But this one was moving across the ocean, seemingly toward the mission. In his landmark interview with Melbourne lawyer and UFO investigator Peter Norris, Father Gill remembered calling out to one of the mission's teachers, Stephen Moy. "Come and look at this." The young man ran down to the beach, followed by his wife Nisi and another teacher. Before long, 39 people were gathered on the sand. It was now apparent, witnesses said in a signed statement, that the light was a solid object of some kind. As it slowly descended, the observers saw that it was a circular craft, glowing blue, with portholes or panels, and something like legs attached to its broad base. At the top was something resembling a railed deck. Other circular objects, similarly glowing, were visible higher and further away. The principal craft came to a halt at about 90 metres above the shallows, and possibly it stood stock still in the air. Father Gill recalled, "We all saw movement. A man appeared on the deck. He was joined by 3 others. They were engaged in some kind of activity whose nature we couldn't understand. 1 or 2 of the men would leave, then return, then go off again, for no perceived reason. At intervals, a thin shaft of electric blue light shone upward from the ship's deck, illuminating the low cloud cover. Father Gill said, the men seemed to be lit not only by the reflection of this light upon them, but by a sort of glow which completely surrounded them as well as the craft. The glow didn't touch them, but there seemed to be a space between their outlines and the lights, like I guess a kind of phosphorescence. I'm guessing. I don't actually know people about it. But sometimes I like to pretend I know shit, and sometimes I extrapolate shit, and sometimes I accidentally come upon things that I happen to be right about, and those, my friends, are astonishing. But anyway, in his statements, diaries and letters to colleagues, Father Gill described the movements of the smaller objects as erratic, confusingly advancing, receding and changing direction. At times they would swing back and forth like a pendulum, he said. One object moved off and appeared to descend to the village. Everyone thought it was going to land and went running down the beach, but it swooped up and over the mountains, turning red as it disappeared. Bedroom invader? An abductee's drawing of a creature which he claims removed him from bed and subjected him to a painful examination. It's a classic drawing of a grey, or what they're sometimes called. What are they called now? Non-biological. What were they called? Dead goddess. Ebens. Extraterrestrial biological entities, I think that stands for. See? Came to me in the end. They're believed to be like interdimensional, or almost like robotic, or sort of enslaved or in service to other some kind of superior alien life form, which is interesting that there's a hierarchy even in alien cultures. So the encounter lasted for almost 3 hours. At 9:30 p.m, the principal disk moved away at enormous speed, casting a halo of blue light on the clouds and changing colour from red to blue and green before vanishing. So breathtaken were the observers on the beach that no one departed. The entire crowd waited, watching the sky, half hoping and half fearing that something more might happen. Their patience was rewarded. At 9:46 p.m, as recorded in Father Gill's notes, the glowing disc returned and hovered until 10:30. This time no occupants were visible. At 11:04 p.m, heavy rain began to fall, driving the witnesses inside. The following evening, 27th of June, the circular craft, or one similar to it, appeared again, In a prepared statement, Father Gill described the event. Saturday, 27th of June, 1959. Large UFO first sighted by Annie Borrows, a medical assistant, at 6 p.m. in apparently the same position as last night, only seemed a little smaller. I called Ananias and several others, and we stood in the open to watch it. Although the sun had set, it was still quite light for the following 15 minutes. We watched figures appear on top, 4 of them. No doubt that they are human. 2 smaller UFOs were seen at the same time, stationary, one above the hills west, another overhead. On the large one, 2 of the figures seemed to be doing something near the centre of the deck, occasionally bending over and raising their arms as though adjusting or setting up something not visible. One figure seemed to be standing and looking down at us. I stretched my arm above my head and waved. To our surprise, the figure did the same. Ananias waved both arms over his head. Then the 2 outside figures did the same. Ananias and self began waving our arms, and all 4 now seemed to wave back. There seemed to be no doubt that our movements were answered. All mission boys made audible gasps of either joy or surprise, perhaps both. As dark was beginning to close in, I sent Eric Kodawara for a torch and directed a series of long dashes towards the UFO. After a minute or 2 of this, the UFO apparently acknowledged by making several wavering motions back and forth. Waving by us was repeated, and this was followed by more flashes of torch. Then the UFO began slowly to become bigger, apparently coming in our direction. It ceased after perhaps half a minute and apparently came no further. After a further 2 or 3 minutes, the figures apparently lost interest in us, for they disappeared below deck. Let's put below in inverted commas. At 6:25 p.m, 2 figures reappeared to carry on with whatever they were doing before the interruption. In his interview with Peter Norris, Father Gill recalled how he and his companions shouted to reattract the men's attention, beckoning to them to land on the beach, but the occupants did not respond. At 6:30, Father Gill calmly went inside for dinner. When he returned at 7 p.m, the principal UFO was still present, but seemingly smaller. All the observers walked to church for evensong. When they returned at 7:45, cloud cover was heavy and the disk was no longer visible. The people of Boyanai Mission would not see their glowing humanoid visitors again. However, at 10:40 p.m, everyone's sleep was shattered by what Father Gill described as an ear-splitting explosion which seemed to have originated just outside a mission house window. Shortly after the sightings, the Reverend William Gill made a scheduled return flight to Australia on church duties. His visit gave investigators the chance to assess him and his voluminous documentation of the Boyanai incidents. Everyone who met the missionary was impressed by his quiet integrity. He was still clearly bemused by all that had befallen him and his flock, and sought no notoriety or gain other than to try to ascertain what he had seen. Dr. David Menzel, a Harvard University astronomer and dedicated UFO debunker, announced, without visiting Boyani or interviewing witnesses, which is kind of rude, you should at least speak to the people before you make these conclusions, people of Earth, that they had all obviously been looking at the planet Venus. In his book, The UFO Experience, Professor J. Allen Hynek corrected Menzel, pointing to Gill's own written statement that he had seen the planet, which occupied a distinctly separate part of the sky. The Royal Australian Air Force sent 2 officers to interview Father Gill. At that time, like its contemporaries in the US, Britain and Europe, the RAF was heavily engaged in discrediting the witnesses and trying to shake their belief in what they had experienced. Father Gill recalled, characteristically without rancour, that the officers talked about stars and planets and then left. By the way, a priest is quite a well-educated man usually. They usually spend quite some time studying in seminaries and at university degree level. Like, they're not your average idiot, is what I'm saying. They're well educated and quite able to write proper reports and describe things accurately, usually, unless they're, an raging alcoholic or out of their mind for some other reason. But, a lucid priest just having just had his dinner and observing something and writing a report the way he did is, I think, to be commended, given priests aren't supposed to, even believe in those kind of things. But seeing is believing, is it not? And the Vatican also is starting to acknowledge that there's more than just, human beings on planet Earth out in the cosmos. And really, it makes perfect sense. If there is a supreme being, a creator, why would he just make one humanoid life form in an entire multiverse? It's not logical. Anyway, those are my opinions, and I'm sticking to it, people of Earth. But the Gill encounters were not so easily dismissed. Importantly, there were multiple witnesses who offered strikingly similar accounts. Even more significantly, it became apparent in the weeks following the visitations that they had occurred during a flying saucer flap involving scores of isolated settlements across Papua New Guinea. Investigators were able finally to catalogue more than 600 of these sightings. So I wonder what was going on, that they were going to that particular set of islands and at that particular time frame 600 times. Excuse me. So it's a bit odd, but I guess probably thinking that they were fairly isolated, that the reports wouldn't be well spread, but there's nothing like communication, people, and reporting. Nowadays with the internet, things can be reported in a nanosecond. Certainly no reason for lack of communication or lack of proper reporting, especially if someone's reasonably well educated and of sound mind and lucid. Anyway, Peter Norris, tough-mindedly sceptical president of the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society, summarised the Boyani case favourably. The Gill reports, he said, constituted the most remarkable testimony of UFO activity ever given to civilian investigators. The Society evaluated the Gill documents as unique because, for the first time, credible observers, note credible, had reported the presence of humanoid beings associated with UFOs. Look at us, we're here. Dr. Menzel and his fellow flying saucer disparagers had an easier time in the 1950s than they would have enjoyed today. Technology in the form of videotape and digital cameras now enables witnesses to produce proof, or at least tentative proof, of what they saw. A particularly dramatic case of mass verification occurred on the 11th of July 1991, when thousands of tourists poured into Mexico City, recommended as the ideal place to view the pending eclipse of the sun. Many visitors brought video cameras to capture the event. They also captured something they had not expected. As the solar disk darkened, a variety of anomalous objects, domed, circular, oval, cigar-shaped, began to swarm through the sky above the city. Literally hundreds of people, from home movie amateurs to professional TV cameramen, caught the extraordinary scene on videotape. The UFO invasion excuse me. The UFO invasion was screened by television stations around the world. The phenomenon lasted for weeks beyond the eclipse and attracted television crews from the United States, Japan, and Europe. One tape, shot at night by a police officer in Atlixo, shows a circular craft clearly under intelligent control, hovering at roughly 1,000 feet. Bigger than a football field, it is ringed with yellow lights. Police Chief Miguel Cruz commented, "The lights look exactly like a ship's cabin windows." Even Joseph Fernandez, Mexico's most celebrated UFO debunker, was impressed. After years of telling witnesses they had seen nothing more than Jupiter or weather balloons, he conceded that many of the images shown on TV were unexplainable. The footage that first caused him to change his mind showed two bright red globes performing sharp-angled turns above a mountain. "I will admit that no ordinary aircraft would be capable of these maneuvers," he said. Almost 13 years later, 5th of March 2004, UFOs posed again for Mexican cameras. The photographer this time was a reconnaissance officer aboard an Air Force plane assigned to monitor drug traffickers. While cruising at 11,000 feet through a late evening sky above Campeche, the pilot suddenly realized he had company, a small number of dazzlingly bright objects whose number rapidly increased. Eventually surrounding the aircraft, as tape analysis later showed, were 16 brightly shining UFOs of varying sizes. The Mexican government, which is less inclined towards secrecy than America and her allies, thank the goddess for that, people with common sense, analysed the 15-minute videotape, then released it to newspapers and to Mexico's biggest TV network, Televisa. The footage shows the objects swarming rapidly around the aircraft. Lieutenant Mario Vasquez, The infrared equipment operator said, "These images are genuine, completely real. There's no way they could have been faked or altered." To officials and later to reporters, the pilots and crew offered detailed and separate testimonies. They said the encounter began when 3 discs appeared beside the jet. But the moment the crewmen switched on their camera, 8 more objects popped into view. This was not at all unusual. In a large proportion of the thousands of sightings I have investigated, the same rule, which I call the Father Gill syndrome, has applied. By means of spectacular behaviour or marks left on the ground or subliminal messages, UFOs seem often to invite us to observe them. The French physicist Jacques Vallée had a theory about this. Humanity, he surmised, is being conditioned, slowly trained to look outward and beyond its own petty planetary concerns. Indeed, because we are one giant cosmos and everything is connected, whether we realise it or not, people of Earth. In 1985, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation invited me to conduct a 1-hour national... Don't interrupt, Spirit. Fluffing in the background. He agrees with me, but still. Back again. Anyway, where was I? In 1985, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation invited me to conduct a 1-hour national talkback program on UFOs. I invited listeners to describe not only their sightings, but to recall how those experiences came about. More than half the callers claimed they had received some kind of prior warning that they would see something anomalous. One woman said, "My sister and I were walking one evening in hilly countryside near our house. Suddenly, as we later agreed when we compared notes, our skins began to prickle strangely. Then something prompted us to look up, and we saw dome-shaped objects among the stars. We were both convinced we'd been told to look." I concur with that. Another caller said, "I was driving along a deserted country road in Western Australia when I had to slam on the brakes. A large branch was lying across the road. When I got out to shift the branch, my attention was attracted by something weird. It was a large oval craft sitting in a paddock, ringed with strangely coloured lights and surrounded by a kind of mist. I got out of there as fast as I could. I've often wondered whether that branch was placed on the road deliberately, and whether for some unknown reason I'd been singled out to see what I did." In 1979, when I was writing for Rupert Murdoch's national daily, The Australian, a reader, Mrs. Gail Glanville, kindly sent me a photograph of a peculiar aerial object which she had taken in Gosford, New South Wales. The UFO was large and egg-shaped, with 2 bright panels on its underside. 2 of my photographer friends on the newspaper, Mike Arthur and Andrew de la Rue, submitted the picture to 150 magnifications. Mike reported, "There's no way this could be an insect on the lens or a flaw in the emulsion. In magnification, all details remain clearly delineated." Perhaps more significant than the UFO itself was the manner in which its photograph came to be taken. Mrs. Glanville told me. I was driving through the countryside with my husband, and at the time nothing could have been further from my mind than odd things in the sky. But suddenly, something very powerfully prompted me to tell him to stop the car. I got out and took 2 pictures of the landscape and clouds. Why? I didn't really know. I had no idea I'd photographed anything extra, but when we had the film developed, one of the shots showed the object. The other, although I'd taken it under identical conditions, was blank. So it was phasing in and out of our reality, people of Earth. 3 of the most dramatic UFO, bit like my love life. Smallest violin. Anyway, I had to inject some dark humour there, you understand. It's how I survive and exist in this world. Alas and alack. It's not so bad. Freedom from false people is the greatest blessing and gift the gods could direct to me. 3 of the most dramatic UFO photographs ever taken, see photograph, were accidentally captured by a New Zealand man, Lou Blackburn, on 27th of October 1979. Accidentally, that is, on his part. The object seems to have steered itself directly toward the spot where he was standing. Lou, an amateur photographer, had simply intended to take snaps of a crayfishing boat his friends Norman and June Nielsen recently bought. He was unaware the camera had snared images of a craft ringed with lights until 3 months later, when the cray boat photographs were projected at a Nielsen family slideshow. Lou took the shots at sunrise. Using a 35mm Olympus camera, he photographed the Nielsen's cray boat as it moved out of the tidal river mouth at Motunau Bay. The boat, the dark sea, and the burgeoning sun were the only things he saw. Because they lived in a remote area, the Nielsens had to wait until December to have the film processed. In January, using a projector, they had their first real look at the pictures of their new boat. I'll just show you that photograph again. June Nielsen told me. A friend was first to see the UFO. He asked, "What's that cluster of diamond-coloured lights in the sky?" And we've been wondering ever since. Photographic experts ruled out any possibility the images could be a hoax. One report said, "This is a genuine photograph taken of a UFO under existing cloud formation." Investigators deemed the pictures scientifically significant. The reason? The shots were taken 30 kilometres south of Kaikoura Strait, which, 10 months earlier, was the scene of one of the world's most publicised UFO cases. The drama began on 21st of December 1978, when pilots John Randall and Vern Powell claimed their Argosy freighter plane had been buzzed by 5 UFOs over the Clarence River. Powell, a pilot of 25 years' experience, described one as a brilliant white light like an arc lamp and moving at tremendous speed. Later it changed to a red light. The anomalies were tracked on radar by the air traffic control towers in both Wellington and Christchurch. Controllers watched for more than an hour as the five objects dogged the plane. One UFO registered on Wellington radar and seen by ground observers stopped dead in the sky and remained motionless for 30 minutes, echoing the behaviour of the circular craft that stood stock still above the shallows at Boyanai. The Melbourne TV station, then known as Channel Zero, asked one of them, Channel O. Was it Channel O or Channel Zero? I think it was Channel O, people, if I remember correctly. Asked one of its senior reporters, Quentin Fogarty, who was holidaying in New Zealand, to hire a plane and film crew and recreate the events the pilots had described. The channel's news department saw it as a good, silly season filler. 3 days later, Quentin told me, all we'd expected to do was reconstruct what happened in December. Instead, about 65 kilometres out of Wellington, the objects started coming at us. Dave Crockett started his camera and filmed them. I got the powerful feeling they were in control and were aware we were taking pictures. So just a little bit, I don't know what happened, bit out of alignment. Excuse me. Throughout the flight, Wellington and Christchurch radar relayed warnings to Fogarty's pilot, Captain Bill Startup, that's his actual name, can you believe it? Anyway, that he was in danger of colliding with fleets of glowing unknowns. When he returned to Melbourne, Quentin said several of the objects which had buzzed the plane were immense and saucer-shaped, with clearly visible domes. Others were round or egg-shaped, with rings of light moving around them at fantastic speeds. One was as big as a 4-story house. It's pretty big, people are there. Dr. Mike Deakin, senior lecturer in mathematics at Monash University, also studied the film, making measurements of frozen frames. TV producer Leonard Lee took the film to the United States for testing by the optical physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee. So I pronounced that the Aramaic way. There is a history, people. I am Jewish, so I saw that and pronounced it Maccabee, which is the tribe that fought the well, actually not the Romans, the Syrians, ancient Syrians, and the Hanukkah story. So let me just rewind a little bit. Rewind. Right. By the optical physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee. Well, that's close, isn't it? No matter how you pronounce it, so it's probably right the first time. Oh, Dr. Maccabee made digitised prints of some frames. One of these computer pictures shows a glowing triangle in the black early morning sky. Another reveals an oval shape with a dome-like protuberance. A third depicts a circular object travelling at immense speed. On a single film frame, it describes a near-perfect figure 8. When the news plane landed after its first flight, Mrs. Crockett shaken by the experience, chose to stay on the ground. Quentin Fogarty and his colleagues, showing considerable courage, ordered Argosy up again to take more film. I arrived early at Channel O Melbourne to see the first rough video cassettes of the footage flown in from Christchurch and to hear Quentin's commentary. At one point of his report, he said, "We've just heard from Wellington radar that we've got one behind us. It's a bright white and green light. We've just been informed by Christchurch radar that there are 6 UFOs in front of us. This gets the old adrenaline flowing. I can say for sure we have a firm convert here. We've now heard from Wellington radar. There's another one behind us. Let's hope they're friendly." The Fogarty-Crockett film aroused international interest. The BBC bought it and described it in a newscast as a world first. The footage was shown also on America's CBS. Predictably, it inspired a hail of ridicule from experts who had neither travelled aboard the plane nor rigorously examined the filmic evidence, but simply knew such an event could never have occurred. Idiots. During the Argosy's flights, the Royal New Zealand Air Force was placed on standby. Officially, the force did all it could to debunk and minimise the affair. When Dr. Bruce McCarby tried to charter Argosy to recreate its strange odyssey, the owners refused. The Air Force, they explained, had requested that no further UFO flights be made. Bruce McCarby joined a study group of 17 scientists headed by Professor J. Allen Hynek, former astronomical consultant to the US Air Force. The team included a plasma physicist, an electronics consultant, a biophysicist, and an optical physiologist. They subjected the footage to massive computer analysis. Several months later, Professor Hynek, the former professional skeptic, called a press conference in New York to describe the film as the first verified UFO sighting. He added, "No sensible explanation has been offered for this phenomenon. It is certainly not a hoax. This film and the evidence accompanying it raise UFOs above buffoonery to a scientific level." About bloody time they got with the program, wasn't it? But that's what it took to have it all captured on film. Evidence, people. Evidence. In all things. Evidence. Proof. Evidence. Document everything, as I do in my own life. Keeps me sane when things get weird and tawdry and alienating. Not only aliens alienating. I don't think the aliens would alienate me. They'd probably vibe with me quite well, since I'm a daughter of the gods and all. But anyway, it is what it is, people of Earth. There goes that flock of pigeons all flying in formation again. It's quite lovely. Right, where was I? Continuing on with the story. Just in a little segue, I think it's either benefit of the doubt, Facebook is glitching, but I actually think it's a form of censoring and shutting me down because it happened. They didn't like a comment on a comedy video, which was my own comment about my mother, and subject was smuggling, actually. They didn't like that I said that Australia's a not-so-lucky country. Well, it hasn't been for me, has it? Dear Goddess. Driven into poverty and strangled and brutalised for decades, and on it goes, and on it goes, and on it fucking goes. Hasn't been a lucky country for me. So there was actually nothing wrong with me making that statement. But anyway, they took down that post, that comment, and after that I've been unable to post for 3 days. But they didn't actually tell me that I've been banned or, otherwise blacklisted or shadow banned. But there was a bit of shadow banning going on last week on this platform, actually. So one could get a bit paranoid and curious minds could ask what's going on, but I've decided moving on is not the same thing as giving up. So I've set up another account on a new platform called Parler, which in French means, to communicate or to speak to or speak with, or to parler, as in parler, broker a peace agreement. Anyway, it's kind of interesting that I stumbled across that this morning because another person I follow, Thomas Sheridan, said he'd been completely blocked and banned from both Instagram and Facebook, which is odd what's going on in our world at the moment. People of Earth trying to shut down the truth speakers. So anyway, I've started an account on Parler, and I may regretfully close down my Facebook account unless they fix the glitch. But at the moment it's been 2 days, and they usually fix these little mistakes fairly rapidly. So that's what makes me suspicious that I'm being actively targeted and silenced. And the odd thing is when I post on Instagram, it still shares across to Facebook, and yet I can't post directly into Facebook. So there's no logic to that. It's all a bit strange. But anyway, the Mama T stands by her truth always and forever until the day I finally shuffle off this mortal coil. And I take very unkindly to being silenced, shadow banned, censored, especially if it's verifiable truths from my own lived experience. Just saying. So so there, I'm just letting you know. You can find me, if not on Facebook anymore. I will share my writings on Parler, or Parler, well, I pronounce it the French way. Parler. And yes, anyway, close encounters of the sinister kind. Not all intruders are as apparently harmless as those who tracked the argosy or waved to the watchers at Father Gill's mission. Many contactees claim to have experienced extreme trauma during encounters with aliens. In most countries, support groups have been established to help these people cope. Often, however, circumstances will oblige a sufferer to endure the nightmare alone. One such situation was described to me by correspondent George Hodgkiss. Shortly after my 60th birthday, I retired from a fairly stressful line of work and began to look around for something quite different. I accepted a job minding an oil rig on the edge of the Gibson Desert. I imagined I would be able to enjoy the peace the desert brings, but it didn't entirely turn out that way. The first in a series of troubling events occurred on 21st of May 1986. I turned off the generator and was standing by the gas stove looking out at the clear stars when I saw a huge bright light. At first I imagined it was a convoy of trucks coming my way. As my only contact with people was through the pilots who flew in supplies, I was pleased and put on coffee for the drivers. But when I came back, the light had disappeared. In its place was a brilliantly lit box about the size of a removal van. It hovered above the desert for a while, then faded and vanished. Between May and October, that light appeared frequently and in various forms. Sometimes it was balloon-shaped, and at others like a beam. Often it was accompanied by a deafening roar like a power drill. One night, a formation of flashing lights in the shape of a cube hung over the camp. When I tried to chase them in my Nissan Patrol, I found the battery had gone flat. The next evening, something in the shape of a square hung over the camp. It was so white and bright my eyes ached when I tried to look at it. At this point, for some reason, the diesel engines and generator went into overload. The diesels weighed over 15 tons and were mounted on a steel skid. They'd bounce up and down as though something very powerful was shaking them. All this activity, whatever it was, played havoc with the birds and animals. When I was walking around, birds would simply drop dead in my path. That would really freak me the hell out. And I saw nighthawks, which have amazingly acute eyesight, fly straight into the side of a drill. In October, when my 6 months were up, I returned to Perth with a great sense of relief. In June 1992, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology hosted a conference of health professionals who had psychiatrically examined people making claims of alien contact. They had found the vast majority of these people, drawn principally from the ranks of those who had reported abduction, to be sane. Delegates could suggest no conventional medical explanation for what seemed to be happening. One of the people attending the conference was the social scientist Keith Basterfield, a working member of the organisation UFO Research Australia. Before studying the evidence presented at the conference, he had tended to disbelieve the testimony of purported abductees, but following his return to Adelaide, he established a telephone hotline to help people who believed they had been victims. One caller, a psychology graduate, told the psychologists working with Basterfield that she had until recently felt little interest in UFOs and had read virtually nothing on the subject. She said her views changed radically when something lifted her from her bed and subjected her to an unpleasant ordeal. With what seemed to be characteristic understatement, she told the psychologists, "I woke up one morning and told my husband that an interesting thing had happened overnight. I'd found the room filled by a brilliant, blinding light. I was then lifted up into the light, getting the feeling meanwhile that I shouldn't be afraid. Next, I was lying on a table surrounded by strange beings. I got the mental impression they were saying, 'This will be uncomfortable, but not painful.' Then I felt something probing my stomach, and I sensed they were going to take eggs from an ovary. They told me not to be frightened and said, 'You're going back now, but you won't feel this really happened.' Next thing I knew, I was wide awake in bed, remembering everything. I never believed for a moment that the experience was a dream. It was stark and very real." Keith Basterfield told me that some victims fear for their sanity, but psychologists working with UFO researchers are helping these people come to terms with whatever it might be that has happened to them. Some people seeking the hotline's help reported having their first experiences in early childhood. One was a Queensland man who recalled being kidnapped by arcane beings when he was between 4 and 6 years old. The aliens were blue-grey in colour, with large heads and eyes and no visible ears. While talking to the boy telepathically, they placed him on a low table, then moved a box the size of a cigarette pack across his body. Then they inserted something up my nose, the man said. It was painful. Throughout my life I've associated this experience with seeing a blue light outside my window. Mysteriously missing time was a major theme in many cases. A Finnish couple, Ben and Helen Kay, set out from Rockhampton in central Queensland at 11:35 p.m. to drive to Gladstone. They were bemused on arrival to find that 40 minutes had passed and that neither had the faintest memory of the towns they had passed through. However, they did remember seeing an unusual green light. Something odd had also happened to their 1971 Valiant sedan. It had unusual marks on the bonnet and was covered with a film of odourless oil. A similarly tantalising time loss was experienced by two young men, P and H, while driving near Port Lincoln, west of Adelaide. Pardon me. We saw a light in the sky. Then we entered a kind of endless space, one said. Excuse me. During this time, I can vaguely remember walking into a big room and seeing some kind of being. Then we were back in the car, and it was hours later. Some reports of abductions are similar to descriptions of near-death experiences, Keith Basterfeld said. UFO burns. Victims sued America. In 1982, 3 people who claimed they had suffered radiation injuries from a flame-belching UFO sought $20 million compensation from the US government. The administration denied all knowledge of the event. The scarred, sick victims were a 51-year-old grocery store owner, Betty Cash, her employee Vicky Landrum, 57, and grandson Colby, age 7. Their ordeal began on a pine-wooded back road near Huffman, Texas, on 29th of December 1980. After eating an evening meal at a roadhouse, they were headed home with Betty at the wheel. At about 9:15 p.m, they reported, a large glowing object emitting flames from its base appeared above the treetops ahead. It appeared to be descending swiftly, and Betty accelerated, hoping to speed past before it landed. But she was too late. The bright blue UFO, diamond-shaped and about 15 times the car's size, was now so low that its cone of flame blocked the road ahead. Betty came to a halt about 80 metres from the object, which she subsequently described as making a beeping sound, looking like aluminium, and lighting the road brighter than day. She was surprised that the forest crown had not caught fire, but she could see in the bright light that the upper leaves had turned brown. She put the car in park, then, with her friend, got out for a closer look. Vicky quickly returned to comfort the terrified boy, but Betty, consumingly curious, dared to walk closer. She had no doubt that the peculiar object was an aircraft of some kind, one that seemed to be in trouble. She began to wonder whether she should try to get help. This was when she first noticed that the brightness had begun to burn her skin. She hurried back to the car, whose handle was so fiery it burnt her flesh. Using a jacket sleeve to protect her fingers, she opened the door, steadied herself on the dashboard, and climbed back into the sedan's now stifling interior. When investigators later checked the car, they found that Betty's fingerprints had become permanently embedded in the dash. Betty closed the window against the heat and switched the air conditioning to cold. As she cowered with her companions, wondering what to do next, the diamond-shaped object began slowly to ascend. When it was clear of the trees, an astonishing thing happened. A swarm of black military helicopters, filling the sky with shattering noise, suddenly appeared and surrounded the UFO. In their legal testimony, the women said the helicopters gave the impression of being escort aircraft. As the enigmatic craft, still ringed by helicopters, moved away over the trees, Betty tried to restart her car. After great difficulty, the engine came to life and she was able to head home. Several times along the way, the trio spotted the glowing UFO again, dogged by its estimated 23 helicopter companions. They were not the only witnesses. An oilfield worker, Jerry MacDonald, noticed the display from his back garden. An off-duty Dayton policeman, Al Walker, and his wife were driving home from Cleveland. Who were driving home from Cleveland, also saw the aerial procession. He identified the helicopters as Chinooks. This tallied with investigators' later analysis of drawings separately made by Betty Cash and the Landrums. The copters, their pencil pictures suggested, were large double-rotor CH-47s, accompanied by what appeared to be fast single-rotor Bell-Hooeys. Betty dropped her passengers at their house, then drove on to her own home, where a friend and her children were staying. The friend was shocked at Betty's appearance. Her skin was a blazing red, suggestive of someone who had lain in tropical sun all day. Her neck was grossly swollen and blisters had appeared on her eyelids and mouth. She woke frequently during the night to vomit. Colby and his grandmother suffered symptoms similar but less severe, probably because they had spent less time outside the car. Nevertheless, all three were so sick that they were eventually admitted to hospital, where specialists tried unsuccessfully to ascertain what had happened to them. The best guess was that they had suffered radiation burns, but no one could be sure. In the years that followed, Betty was repeatedly hospitalized, several times for intensive care. She lost more than half the hair on her head. Continuous skin eruptions left her with permanent scars. Vicky and Colby suffered similar skin troubles along with deteriorating eyesight. Vicky also lost hair from her head. When it eventually grew back, it was of a different texture, which is often the case after radiation therapy, even with cancer survivors, comes back differently. Not always, but most often. All three victims incurred such enormous medical expenses that in 1982 they approached their Senator Lloyd Bentsen, who arranged a meeting with government lawyers at Bergstrom Air Force Base. The Army assigned Lieutenant Colonel George Sarin to investigate. He reported that although he was convinced of Cash and Landrum's sincerity, he could find no evidence that military helicopters had been in the area at the time. No basis in the area could have produced such a large number of Chinooks. John Schuessler, Deputy Director of America's Mutual UFO Network, otherwise known as MUFON, also studied the case. He detected no radioactivity at the encounter site, but did find an area of melted asphalt. When the US military sympathetically but firmly refused any compensation, cause Citizens Against UFO Secrecy stepped in. New York attorney Peter Gersten filed a $20 million lawsuit on the three victims' behalf after hearing expert evidence from NASA and the Air Force, Army and Navy. US District Court Judge Ross Sterling dismissed the case. He was satisfied, he said, that no craft similar to that described by Cash and Landrum was under the control of any US government agency. So he dismissed it on a technicality, because that might be true, that the alien craft was not under government agency, but the Chinooks. Can't get much more Yankee Doodle dandy than that, can we, babies? But the judge might have been wrong. In the decades following the Cash Landrum incident, many witnesses reported seeing black helicopters in company with UFOs, which also leads to the assumption or the allegation that many of the UFOs we're seeing are not actually from, outer space, but our own reverse engineered technology from the craft that landed in 1947 at Roswell. So the theories go. And if they're being guided or escorted by our own black helicopters, kind of lends credence to that idea, does it not? Churchill, Stalin in Flying Saucer Search. The leaders of Britain and the Soviet Union were so alarmed by military and civilian UFO sightings that they established secret projects to discover what was going on. In 1952, during a rash of UFO reports, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent his advisers this memo. What does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Churchill was promptly briefed with a report from a shadowy scientific panel, the Working Party on Flying Saucers. Established in 1951 in conjunction with the Defence Ministry, the group was chaired by the developer of radar, Sir Henry Tizard. Tizard? Tizard. Tizard? There's only one Z. Anyway, its findings were comforting. All UFO sightings were explicable by misidentifications of earthly aircraft or such natural events as meteors or the weather. Whether Churchill was reassured by this, history does not record, but it is known that, several months after he wrote his memorandum, the Royal Air Force issued an order banning all personnel from discussing sightings with anyone not from the military. In London's Observer, 21st of November 2001, writer Paul Harris commented, "In trying to underplay sightings, Britain was following the lead of the United States, which had conducted several studies into its own UFO sightings and adopted a policy of official secrecy. When the British report was presented, a top CIA scientist travelled over to the meeting to make sure the conclusions of America's closest ally fitted in." I find this reprehensible and the most stupid thing that could ever have been done in the history of our human species. It really is dangerous. Silencing of truth, even uncomfortable truths, like the fact that we humans are not the only ones here on planet Earth. Dictator Joseph Stalin, as described in greater detail on page 135, was equally disturbed by the UFO mystery. In 1948, he ordered that secret research projects into the phenomenon be established at no less than 4 military establishments and 7 universities. Their brief was to determine the nature of flying saucers and to establish the degree, if any, to which they were a threat to Russia. Stalin's scientific advisers were generally disinclined to believe that the craft were of terrestrial origin, at least as we understand that term. Optimistically, the dictator ordered that UFOs be captured and their technologies studied to give the USSR a technological edge over its enemies. There is no evidence that a working UFO ever fell into Soviet hands, but there are clues which seem tentatively to suggest that the United States might have been luckier. Right, we have another reasonably long chapter and a short one and another short one. Anyway, I think I'll stop there and have a wee rest, people of Earth. People of Earth and all sentient beings, those of higher dimensions, and those who keep our planet kicking along, protecting us as best as they can, ironically, from humans. It's outrageous, really outrageous. But anyway, we're getting some more rain coming along and skies are looking murky again. And it is what it is. And I have to wait for everything to dry up to get my grass mowed, which is also a bother, but again, it is what it is, and life goes on. It's sacred space, so bye for now from my home, my sacred space, my Tanya's last stand at times, to yours. Have a beautiful day wherever you are in the space-time continuum. And I may be back later on this evening if I feel like reading stories again, or I may be back tomorrow. It'll just depend on how I'm travelling mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, how motivated I get. I made a bit of jewellery yesterday. Well, I just made some hooks, larger hooks for my earrings, because the ones I had on those were far too small, kept falling out and losing one. So I did that for a couple of pairs, and we have to go through and do that for all the ones that are too tiny. It's a bother when you lose your earrings, people of Earth. And I made this lovely ring from a spoon, a Versailles spoon handle I bought about a month or so ago, 2 months ago now. And no, not 2 months, 6 weeks. And it's of a sweet little cherub playing some kind of lute or lyre, and quite lovely. I had a bit of a job massaging it into shape, but I got there in the end. So yes, very contented and satisfied with that. And I may go later on. I can just make out his dear little face. Can you make him out? Or is there too much reflection? No. Oh, here he is. Sweet, isn't it? I couldn't resist. So, and I may have a crack at, yet another crack at trying to do the bezel for my cuff I'm wanting to make, but I'm thinking I may need to buy a thicker gauge of fine silver. It might be too fine, and that's why it keeps bloody melting. And you know, I'll know if it fails again, I'll know that that's what I'm going to have to do. But then on the other hand, I need to learn, don't I, to even solder finer bezel. So I guess, but I just think it'd be easier if I had a slightly thicker gauge. It won't be something to grab onto. It's nothing like having something to grab onto, people of Earth. Just saying. Oh, you have to laugh. Anyway, bye for now. Take good care. Be of good cheer, and I'll be back either later or tomorrow.